base, not all the way to the bottom, 3 lines into the wide lines. So we're starting from R Yitzchak Nafcha. Okay, but before we start, we have to get reviewed because this is very complicated. I didn't even learn the whole block today because this was pretty complicated to get through. So we learned in the Mishnah a couple of blot ago about a woman who had an Eid Echad that her husband died, and because of that she got married, and then her husband showed up. So the Mishnah says she has to leave the second man that she married, of course, and she also has to get divorced from her husband as well. And the way we understood it until now was because it was a knas for her. We're canceling her because she didn't check carefully enough. Oh, I see Benzi's here, and being that we started, I can announce now that Benzi is sponsoring the broadcast from Erev Shabbos, from Sunday, Lul Nishmas, his grandfather, Rav Pinchas ben Reb Zev Klein, whose boy B'Yom Yortet was today's Shabbos, Yud Bei Sivan. His neshama should have an aliyah, and it should be a gita beiter for the whole mishpucha. And Benzi, you're a good source of nachas for him. So it works 2 ways. We should gita zachat. So we learned our understanding, our world was based on the woman being usher to her original husband because of a knas, because she wasn't checking carefully enough. That's what everything we learned so far was based on. And because of that, in a more complicated case, like the case in our last Mishnah, where there were 2 couples involved. So I'm going to use, as the 2 couples, I'm going to use Ruvain and Leah and Shimon and Rachel. And Reuben and Shimon are complete strangers, but Rachel and Leah are sisters. And our Gemara earlier on the Daf Tzadikei and Beis, discussed a case where, again, Reuben was married to Leah and Shimon was married to Rachel. And what happened is Reuben went on a business trip overseas with Shimon's wife, Rachel. And while they were away, Shimon, who remained at home, and Leah, who remained at home, so Shimon, who's Rachel's husband, and Leah, who's Reuben's wife, they remained at home. They heard from an Eid Echad that Rahman Litzlan, Reuben died and Rachel died. So being that Reuben died and Rachel died, Shimon married Leah. And Rahman Litzlan, Reuben and Rachel come back and they see that Shimon is married to Leah. So the Tanna Kamma told us that Reuven is still going to be mutter to his wife Leah, because Reuven will be mutter to his wife Leah, because Leah, Reuven will be mutter to his wife Leah, because Reuven will be usher to his wife Leah. Reuven will be usher to his wife Leah, because his wife Leah, who was a married woman, had relations with Shimon. So Reuven is usher to his wife Leah. But what about Shimon to his wife Rachel? Shimon's wife Rachel, who was away on the trip, didn't do anything wrong. Shimon did something wrong. Shimon lived with Leah. So the Tanna Kamma tells us that Shimon, even though he lived with Leah, doesn't impact his marriage with Rachel. So Shimon gets to stay married to Rachel, but Reuben has to divorce Leah. That's how the Tanna Kamma learns. Rabbi Yosi argues. In the first Pshat that we learned on Friday, Rabbi Yosi argues and he says as follows. Rabbi Yosi says that although the Tanna Kamma says that Shimon is always allowed to remain married to Rachel, Rabbi Yosi says no. If originally the reason why Shimon married Leah is because 2 Eidim came and said that Reuven died, and that Rachel died, then in fact, Shimon could remain married to Rachel, and Reuben could remain married to Leah. It was an onus. But if only one eight came, then Reuben will be usher to Leah, because Leah got married based on eight echad. She didn't check carefully enough. Her husband Reuben was really alive, so she becomes usher permanently to Reuben. But Shimon, the Tanna Kamma said that Shimon could remain married to Rachel. Zok Yosi, no. If Reuben can't remain married to Leah, then we also consider that Shimon can't be married to Rachel. So basically, if both couples will be mutter, that's fine. But if one couple is going to be usher, if Reuben's going to be usher to keep his wife Leah, then Huadin Shimon cannot keep his wife Rachel. That's what the first Pshat said.
But in fact, the fact is that he's allowed to have two wives.
Grandchild's wedding.
Correct. But the problem isn't the two wives. The problem is he's not allowed to be married to two sisters.
So we're
And
planning.
Rachel and Leah are sisters. But you're right. Just because he by mistake lived with Leah, who was his wife's sister, that doesn't make him usher to his wife Rachel. It's only a knas. According to Rabbi Yosi only, the Tanna Kamma would disagree with that. So that's the Tanna Kamma. On the Tanna Kamma, Rabbi Yosi made a comment. And we have a problem with the Tanna Kamma. We have a problem a little bit with Rav Ami's Pshat. Because in Rav Ami's Pshat, what are the words that Rabbi Yosi said? Rabbi Yosi said, if Leah is going to be usher to Reuven, then Rachel will be usher to Shimon. But if Leah will be mutter to Reuven, then Rachel will be mutter to Shimon. When is Leah mutter to Reuven? That's in the case where she got married al pi shnei edim. The problem is the Tanna Kamma of our Mishnah is not discussing a case where she got married al pi shnei edim. The Tanna Kamma is speaking about a case where they got married al pi echad. Last Mishnah, which is the first Mishnah of the parak, that Mishnah discusses two edim. So it's a little funny that Rabbi Yosi over here in our Mishnah is going to comment on a case that's really only mentioned in the last Mishnah that was two edim. So R Yitzchak Nafcha has another pshat, and his pshat allows us to be focused only on this Mishnah and Rabbi Yosi's comments, where he says that if Reuven cannot stay married to Leah, so too Shimon cannot stay married to Rachel. But if Reuven could stay married to Leah, then Shimon could stay married to Rachel. That comment that he made is referring to only our Mishnah, only with Eid Echad. But the question is, what does he mean? So because of that, we have to go back to the beginning and open our minds. Until now, our assumption is the only reason why, if a woman gets married al pi echad and her husband shows up, she can't go back to her husband, it's a knas. It's a mistake. She wasn't mizana b'mezid. But we cancel her. And why do we cancel her? Because we want her to be so super sure that her husband really died before she marries a second husband that we throw the book at her in the case where she made a mistake. So this way, if she knows how badly penalized she will be if she's mistaken and her husband comes back, that'll make her very thoroughly and vigorously analyze, check, examine, investigate to make sure that her husband is really not alive before she remarries. That's how we understood it until now. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha is changing everything. And Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says, you know why she can't go back to her husband? It's because of Gzeir. And this is the Gzeir. So let's talk about the simplest case, the case in its simplest form. There's a woman whose husband travels away. She hears al pi echad that he died, and now she marries somebody else. The reason why she cannot go back to her first husband is very simple. Because we force, like the Mishnah said in the first Mishnah of the parak, we forced even the second husband to give her a get. Why do we force the second husband to give her a get? His kedushin was never typhus. She was a married woman when she married her second husband. The answer is because people might mistakenly think that her first husband, in fact, gave her a get before he left. And the marriage to her second husband was, in fact, a legitimate marriage. People might think that the marriage to the second husband was a legitimate marriage. And if we just let her walk free from her second husband because we think that the Kedushin wasn't chal, people are going to say that women don't need get. So because of that, we force the second husband to give her a get. Now that the second husband gives her a get, we can't let her go back to her first husband because we know there's an isser of machshur grushas mishanisses. If one divorces his wife and she remarries somebody else, and then somebody else divorces her, you cannot marry her again. So here, since we required a get of the second husband, she can no longer go back to her first husband because then people are going to think that machshur grushas mishanisses is allowed. So this is a whole new pshat. And that's why she can't go back to her first husband, because people are going to think that her first husband is taking back his wife after he divorced her, and she had already been married to somebody else, and that somebody else divorced her. So what's the nafkamina? The nafkamina is in a case where no one would have a havamina that she's actually requiring her get from the second husband. So in a normal case where she thought her husband died, and she married a second husband, people might think that her first husband divorced her. Therefore, the Kedushin was typhus with her second husband, and therefore she needed to get from her second husband. But there are certain cases where nobody would think that, where everybody knows for sure she doesn't need a get from her second husband. And now I'm going to give you two examples of such cases. Example number one, where her first husband and her second husband are brothers. So let's say Leah was married to Reuven, and Reuven, they have no children. And Reuven went to Medina Sayyah. And Leah gets a message from an Echad that Reuven died. So now she falls to Yibum, to Shimon. And she marries Shimon. Then Reuven comes back. Now, over here, we don't say Shimon has to give her a get. You know why? Because nobody would think that she was properly married to Shimon. Because even if Reuven actually gave his wife a get before he traveled, and she's single, she still can't have Kedushin from Shimon, because Shimon is Reuven's brother. And we know that the Isser of Eishes Ach is a Chiv Karis, and the Kedushin wouldn't be Chal. So in a case where the second husband was the brother of the first husband, there's no reason to require a get of the second husband, because nobody's going to think that she's properly married to the second husband. Because again, even if the first husband gave her a get, Kedushin is still not toivus with the second husband. So according to R Yitzchak Nafcha, everybody would agree that if the first husband and the second husband were brothers, everybody agrees that she can go back to her first husband. So in a way, it's counterintuitive, because if she was just a Neshus, then she can't go back to her first husband. But if she's a Neshus and Neshusach, there's a double whammy Yisr, then we're Makel, and then she could go back to her first husband. And once again, the svara is very simple, because no one's going to think that the Kedushin of the second husband was a good marriage, and therefore we don't need a get. If we don't need a get, then she can go back to her first husband, because there's no chashas of machshir grushas mishanisses, because everybody knows that the second marriage never had any validity. So that's one example. It's a relatively simple example. But I want to add one layer of complication to this example. What happens if Reuben, who was the first husband of Leah, who went to travel, what if he didn't make nisuin on her? He only made kedushin. So this woman was mikudeshes to Reuben. Reuben travels abroad. She finds out that Reuben died, and then she marries Shimon. She does even to Shimon. There she would need a get from Shimon. The Kedushin couldn't have been typhus. Everybody knows the Kedushin couldn't have been typhus. Zok R Yitzchak Nafcha, no. If there was only Kedushin, people are going to say, and people really have these tiva cheshbonis, people are going to say that when Reuven was Mekadesh, his wife Leah, he made a Tanai. Whatever Tanai it was. And the Tanai was not fulfilled. And because of that, the Kedushin was never Chal. which means when Shimon married her, she was a single woman who was never married before. So the kedushin is toifus. So then Shimon would have to give a get. Once Shimon gives a get, she can no longer go back to Reuven. So if she was in the Nesua when Reuven went away, then for sure we don't say there's a Tanai. Why don't we say there could have been a Tanai by Nesua? Because someone doesn't want to do Nesua and have a bia with a woman, and then the Tanai should undo that retroactively, which means his bia retroactively was a bia snus. But if he only made kedushin and not Nesuin, he only made a bia, he didn't make a bia, he only made a kedushin, then it's possible that there's a Tanai here that nullified the original marriage. So come to Chois, in a case where Reuben and Shimon are brothers, it will make a big difference whether or not Reuben was only Mekadesh this lady, and if he was only Mekadesh this lady, and then she thought he died and she married Shimon, Reuben will not be able to take his wife back, because then Shimon would have to give a get, because people are going to think that Reuben's marriage was nullified, because it was Kedushin al Tanai, and the Kedushin was never Chal. But if Reuben was Nesua, if he made Nesuin on her, then Reuben could take her back. That's how R Yitzchak Nafcha learns, because it's all dependent upon whether or not we see the need to make Shimon give a get. If it's obvious to everybody that Shimon's Kedushin was never a Kedushin, and therefore Shimon doesn't have to give her a get, she can go back and marry Reuben. She can go back to her marriage with Reuben. But if it's not obvious to everybody that she doesn't need a get, for instance, they think that the first Kedushin might have been bottled because there was a Tanai, then she needs a get from Shimon, and therefore she's also to go back to Reuben. So that was one example of a case where she wouldn't need a get from Shimon, because everybody knows Shimon's Kedushin could not have been a good Kedushin. And now I'm going to offer you another example of why Shimon wouldn't have to give her a get. And the case could be the case of our Mishnah. Shimon was married to Leah's sister Rachel. Exactly our case where there's two couples. So again, what was the case of the Gemara that we're discussing? Reuven was married to Leah, and Shimon was married to Rachel. And Reuven went away on a trip with Rachel. And now Shimon and Leah thought that Reuven and Rachel died. So Shimon marries Leah. So let's think. When they come back, does Shimon have to give Leah a divorce? No, because everybody knows, even if Reuven had divorced Leah before he left, Shimon couldn't marry Leah anyway, because Shimon is married to Rachel, and you can't marry two sisters. So the Kedushin that Shimon would have made on Leah would never have been typhus, because Shimon was married to Rachel. So this is also an example of a case where Leah would be able to go back to Reuven. Leah can go back to Reuven. You know why? Because Leah doesn't need a get from Shimon. Because everybody knows there was never a Kedushin, because Shimon's Kedushin would never have worked on Leah, because Shimon was married to Rachel. But once again, you have the same difference. If Shimon was only married to Rachel with a Kedushin and not with a Nesuin, then we will force Shimon to give Leah a get. Because people might say that Shimon's marriage to Rachel was based on a Tnai, which was not fulfilled. So in fact, Shimon retroactively was never married to Rachel. And if that's the case, then Shimon would have to give a get to Leah. Once Leah receives a get from Shimon, she can no longer go back to Reuven. So, if you take just the case, if we just focus on the last case we discussed, where Shimon was married to Rachel, and Reuven was married to Leah, and Reuven went on a business trip with his sister-in-law, Rachel, and Shimon and Leah thought that they both died, because Nerecha told them they both died. Shimon married Leah, and then everyone comes back, and we realize that there's an Ashes Ish there, there's an Ashes Ak, there's a Choishisha, there's many problems here. If Shimon was Nesua to Rachel, then we know, it's obvious to all the onlookers, that Shimon's Kedushin to Leah was never Chal. And therefore Leah will be able to go back to her husband Reuven. But if Shimon was only married to Rachel with Kedushin, then people will say that the Tanai that might have been there was Mevatel that Kedushin. And in fact, when Shimon made a Kedushin on Leah, it would have been a good Kedushin, because maybe Reuben gave her a get, which means Shimon has to give Leah a get. And once Shimon gives Leah a get, Leah can no longer go back to her husband Reuben. So, according to R Yitzchak Nafcha, the way he understands Rabbi Yosi, what did Rabbi Yosi say? If Leah becomes usher to Reuven, then Rachel will be usher to Shimon. So when would Leah become usher to Reuven? If Shimon only made Kedushin on Rachel and not Nesuim. So if Shimon only made Kedushin on Rachel, then we say that maybe Shimon's Kedushin on Leah was Chal, and therefore Shimon needs to give Leah a get, and therefore Leah can't go back to Reuven. So since Shimon caused that Leah can't go back to Reuven, we say as well, we can't say that Shimon can't take his wife Rachel back either. But if Reuven can take back Leah, why would Reuven be able to take back Leah? Because Shimon made Nesuin on Rachel, and if Shimon made Nesuin on Rachel, it's crystal clear that its Kedushin on Leah was never a Kedushin, and therefore no get would be required, and therefore Leah can go back to her husband Reuven. Under those circumstances, Shimon can also take back his wife Rachel, and that's how Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha learns Pshat and Yosi. So now let's learn this inside. We're on the third wide line of Daf Tzadik Amud Beis. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha Amar L'Olam HaSeifa. We're only referring to the very last Mishnah that we just discussed, where only one aide came and said that Reuven died and Rachel died. But Ha da Azli Arusasai V'Gisai, if Shimon's wife Rachel was only Arusa to him, and she traveled with Reuven, then Leah will be usher to Reuven, like we explained, because people are going to say that Shimon's marriage to Rachel dissolves because it was only Kedushin and there was a Tnai, and therefore Shimon's marriage to Leah was Chal, and therefore Shimon has to give Leah a get, which now prohibits Leah from going back to her husband Reuven, and therefore they're both usher. And the case where they're both mutter, is the Osli Ishtoi B'Gisai. When Shimon wasn't just making a Kedushin on Rachel, he made Nesuin on Rachel. Therefore, everybody knows that Shimon's marriage to Leah was never valid, and therefore no get will be required. If Leah doesn't have to receive a get from Shimon, then Leah can go back to her husband Reuven, and therefore, by the same token, Rachel can go back to her husband Shimon. The Tanna Kamma under these circumstances said, it makes no difference if Shimon's marriage to Rachel was Kedushin only, or if Shimon's marriage to Rachel was Nesuin. Either way, Eshes Gisai Asira, Reuven and Leah may not get back together. Leah is also to Reuven. She was an Eshes Ish, Kezinsa, the Ish Doi Shari. But Shimon can go back to his wife Rachel. That's what the Tanna Kamma said. The Kamma Rabbi Yosi, and Rabbi Yosi responded, no, I say there's a difference. If Rachel was fully married to Shimon with Kedushin and Nisuin, the Lekala Meimer Tna Havalei Nisuin, you cannot say that Shimon made a Tnai when he made the Nisuin with Rachel. Therefore, the Einoi Poisel Al Yidei Acher. Then Shimon's marriage to Leah will not disqualify Leah from going back to Reuven, because Shimon's marriage to Leah does not require a get, because it's obvious to everybody that Shimon's Kedushin to Leah was not Chal, because Shimon was married to Rachel, who was Leah's sister. However, therefore we'll say that Shimon can stay married to Rachel because Leah can go back to Reuven. But Arusasar the Gisai, if Shimon wasn't Nesuin, didn't make Nesuin on Rachel, he only made Kedushin on Rachel, The Ikal Meimar to know have a lebe kedushin upaisol yidei acherim. You could say that there was a t'nai in Shimon's kedushin to Rachel, and therefore it became nullified. And we're choshev that now Shimon's marriage to Leah was a valid marriage, and therefore we require that Shimon give Leah a get. And once he does that, he ruins the relationship between Leah and Reuben. Leah can no longer go back to Reuben. Then af posel al yidei atzmai, we will not allow Shimon to take Rachel back. So now we have two pshat. Now I want to highlight one particular major chumrah that you see in your R Yitzchak Nafcha, and one particular major kula that you see in your R Yitzchak Nafcha. The kula that you see from R Yitzchak Nafcha is the obvious, is that if Shimon made nesuin to Rachel, everybody's mutter. Shimon's allowed to stay with Rachel, and Leah's allowed to stay with Reuben. Even though Leah was an Eish who miscalculated and remarried when she wasn't supposed to, she's still mutter to her husband because we don't require Shimon to give Leah a get. That's a huge kula. But there's also a huge chumrah here. The huge chumrah is that we say that people are biglam donim. And if Shimon only made kedushin on Rachel, every person on the street is going to be a lamdan. Oh, Shimon only made kedushin. Maybe it was a t'nai, and maybe the t'nai wasn't fulfilled, and maybe Shimon was never married to Rachel, and maybe because of that, Shimon's kedushin with Leah is a good kedushin and a good marriage, and maybe then Shimon has to give her a get, and therefore she should be asked to go back to Reuben. That's a massive chumrah to say that people are going to make these cheshbonos and imagine about these horrible things that are going on, and they're going to determine that it must be that this woman needs a legitimate get from Shimon because of the t'nai with Rachel, and therefore she should be usher to Reuben. That's a big chumrah. So Dr. Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Halachah Rabbi Yosi. Rabbi Yehuda, in the name of Shmuel, said that Halachah Rabbi Yosi. Shmuel is passing like Rabbi Yosi. At this point in the Gemara assumes that Shmuel is passing like Rabbi Yosi according to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha's Pshat. And Shmuel is saying that we do believe in this chumrah that people are going to think that if Shimon was only mikudeshes to Rachel and not Nesua, that there was a t'nai, and because there was a t'nai and the t'nai wasn't fulfilled, Shimon was really never married to Rachel, and therefore Shimon's kedushin on Leah is valid, therefore a get is required, and therefore Leah cannot go back to Reuben. That's included in what Shmuel meant when Shmuel said Allah Rabbi Yosef. Fragt Gemara, Matzka for Rabbi Yosef, I'm going to prove to you that Shmuel does not hold of this extra chumrah that if there was only a kedushin, people are going to say that there was really a t'nai and it wasn't chal. I'll prove to you that there's no way Shmuel holds about that chumrah, because we have a very cryptic machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. Matzka for Rabbi Yosef, Umi Amar Shmuel Hachi. Did Shmuel actually paskin like this chumradika shita of Rabbi Yosi according to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, that people are choshed that if it's kedushin, people are going to say that the kedushin is bottle? The boy Itmar, we have a machlokes. Yevamos, a Yevamos. Rav Amar Harehi Keishasish, or Shmuel Amar Eini Keishasish. Very unclear what they mean. Is a Yevamos like a Neishasish, which is Rav's position, or is a Yevamos not like a Neishasish, which is like Shmuel's position? What is he referring to? And why would this be relevant to us? So we're going to see the Gemara has 5 different ways to analyze this machlokes, and the Gemara decides to start with the most complicated way to understand this machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. But Rav Huna says, I'm going to tell you what they mean by this machlokes. It's actually referring to a specific complicated case, which we've already discussed, so this should go smooth. Reuven was Mekadesh Leah, and Reuven went to Medina Sayah, and he had no children. And Shimon, who's home with Reuven's wife, finds out that Reuven died, and now she falls to him to Yibam. And now Shimon made Yibam on his wife. And then Reuben comes back and he says, Oy vey, what's going on over here? So let's think about this situation here. We said earlier that the only reason why, according to R Yitzchak Nafcha, this woman can't go back to her husband, this woman can't go back to Reuben, is because Shimon has to give her a get. But let's think, in this case, where Shimon is Reuben's brother, does Shimon have to give this woman a get? Of course not. Because even if Reuben had given her a get before he left, Shimon is still not allowed to marry her because she is the wife of his brother. It's Eichesach, which is an Isser of Karis. So the Kedushin would never have been Chal. However, so if that's the case, since Shimon wouldn't have had to give her a get, because the Kedushin couldn't have been Chal, even if Reuben gave her his wife a get, because Shimon can't marry, not only can Shimon not marry Reuben's wife, Shimon can't even marry Reuben's ex-wife. So the Kedushin is not Chal, no get required, so she'll go right back to Reuben. But what if Reuben never made Nisuin on this woman? What if Reuben only made Kedushin on this woman? So then, according to the Chumrah that we discussed in Shmuel and Rabbi Yosi, according to that Chumrah, people are going to say, maybe Reuben didn't fulfill the Tanai, and therefore Reuben's marriage to this woman was null and void, and Reuben was never married to this woman. So when Shimon married this woman, in fact, it wouldn't be Chal, and therefore Shimon has to give her a get. And if Shimon has to give her a get, Reuben can't take her back. That's how Rabbi Yosi would understand this, the way we understood in Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. So Zok more beautiful. The Rav Amar Harei Keishes Ish Vasur Liyavim. Rav says she's Asur Liyavim like an Ish in the case where there was Kedushin only. When Reuben only made Kedushin, we treat her like an Ish because we say that Shimon, his marriage was a good marriage because since Reuben had a Tanai in his Kedushin, there was never a marriage. And Shimon's marriage is a good marriage. So it's us. That's consistent with the Chumrah of Yosi. But it was Shmuel Amar Ein the cases is. Shmuel in this case, where Reuben only made a Kedushin, allows Reuben to take his wife back. Obviously, he holds you don't make the super cheshbon that people are going to say, since there was a Kedushin, there was a Tnai, and the marriage is null and void. Rather, clearly Shmuel holds that it doesn't make a difference if it's a Kedushin or a Nisuin. We say that Shimon's marriage never was Chal, no get is required, and in fact, Reuben can take his wife back. So that's a direct stira to Shmuel paskening like Rabbi Yosi. Amalei Abaye, what type of question is that? Umimai dichi Amar Shmuel halacha Rabbi Yosi ad Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha Kamar Dilma der Bami Kamar. You're assuming that when Shmuel paskened like Rabbi Yosi was based on the understanding of Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, and because of that, you assume he holds with this chomer that people will think that there was a kedushin and there was a tnai in the kedushin. Who said that's what Shmuel meant at all? Maybe Shmuel meant to pass like Rabbi Yosi according to Rabbi Ami, and it has nothing to do with this kedushin business, and therefore it's not a steer at all. That's one option. Binami, I have another option. We have many options of how you could understand this where it won't be a problem. Binami had Rabbi Nafka, and even if you want to say that when Shmuel passed like Rabbi Yosi, it was based on the understanding of Rabbi Nafcha. Who said he's passing fully like Rabbi Yosi? Maybe he's only passing partially like Rabbi Yosi. Mimaida Poito, how do you know that he's going on the Chumrah, that if there's only a Kedushin, we offer her to her husband Reuven, maybe it's on the heter part. So let me turn over. Dilma ain't a person. Maybe the psak that Shmuel passing like Rabbi Yosi is the chiddush of pshat lekula. That in fact, if she was nesua, then not only could Shimon stay married to Rachel, but we even let Reuben take Leah back. Maybe that's the chiddush that Shmuel is passing like Rabbi Yosi. So therefore, it's not a stira that elsewhere he paskins that you don't have to worry, even if she's mikudesh, she's still mutter to her husband. Inami. Or I can tell you that who said Rav Huna is right about how he understands the machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Maybe they're not even talking about such a weird case with someone who made kedushin and went to Medisiyah. That's not at all what he's talking about. Mimai Dizil Rav Huna. Who said that the machlokes Rav and Shmuel has anything to do with Rav Huna's understanding? Dilma Lethel the Rav Huna Klal. Maybe that's not the case at all. And the machlokes Rav and Shmuel is whether or not they agree with the famous Rav Hamnuna, who we learned about. Ubid Rav Hamnuna Kamivachi. The Amar Rav Hamnuna, Shemeris Yovim Shazinsa. What if a Shemeris Yovim is Mizana? We know there's no Isser Karas if she's Mizana. There's an Isser Lav. Loisia Eshes Hameisa Chutza. So what if we know if a woman is Mizana, she's also to her husband? What if a Shemeris Yovim is Mizana? Is she become also to do Yibam? Or maybe she can still do Yibam. So Rav Nuna holds also Liatma. She becomes also to do Yibam. And let's say this is the machlokes Rav and Shmuel. The Rav Amar is just like Rav Hamnuna, umifsula nos, and therefore, if she does nus, she can no longer do Yibam. Shmuel Amar and Shmuel is not like an Eshes. So maybe when the Rav and Shmuel were arguing whether or not a Yevamos has the status of an Eshes, it has nothing to do with this weird case with Reuben who made Kedushin and went away. No, it's simple. A woman was Madonna, and she had the status of an Eshes. She's in and she's altered to her husband, or not. Pshat. V'inami, or I can make another suggestion as to what they meant when they had this machlokes, if she's like an Eshes or not, and we'll say it's referring to a machlokes that we already know and we already learned that Rav and Shmuel are arguing about, and that is whether or not Kedushin Taishin be Yevama. If someone goes to a Yevama and says, "I read Mukadeshifli," will the Kedushin be Taifus? So we had a couple of blot ago that Rav learned, since it says in the pasuk Loisia Eshes Hameisa Chutza, the Torah is telling us that they won't even work. They won't be Kedushin Taifus if someone tries to be Mekadosh a woman. Shmuel said, I'm not quite sure what the pasuk means. I'm not sure if the pasuk is saying, like Rav, that the Kedushin is not Taifus, or if it's just a lav. And because of that, Shmuel said, Misafek, she needs a get. We had that machlokes a couple of blot ago. Maybe that's exactly what they mean, what they meant here when they were discussing if a Shemeris Yovim is like a Neshes. The Rav Omar Arei Keshes below Tafsib Kedushin. Rav told us there's no Tvisus Kedushin. Well, Shmuel Omar Einik Keshes for Tafsib Kedushin. Practically more, how could you say that this is what the machlokes Rav and Shmuel is about? They don't repeat themselves. And we already quoted the machlokes in a different place with a different thing that Rav and Shmuel said. So why would they repeat their machlokes again with a slightly different reference? So Gemara, they never repeated it. Rav and Shmuel spoke once. The Gemara says over the machlokes in different places in different ways, but Rav and Shmuel only expressed their machlokes once. Beautiful. Now we're past the complicated Gemara. Now everything is easy. I'm just going to learn one shtickle past the Mishnah because when I was learning today in shul, I got mixed up as I was sharing the case of R Yitzchak Nafcha. And it took a little while to get through it till everybody had clarity in it. So that ate up most of our time. So I didn't get far enough, but we'll catch up as it's a show. So the Mishnah says, Amrullah. I shared a story about a tombstone that they found somewhere in the western United States. And it said John was a great lover. And then underneath it said John was a great friend. And then underneath that it said John was a great mentor. And then beneath that it said John was a great lawyer. And then after that it said John was a great father. John died because all the women who represent each one of these things about him met each other. And that's how he got killed. So that's what this mission is a little bit about. Amrullah, they told someone, Rahman al-Islam, your wife died. So what did he do? He married this woman's sister, they shared a father. There's nothing wrong with that. Because Achois Isha is mutter once one's wife dies. Then they came and told him, Meta, your second wife died. So he married the sister of his second wife, but this sister only shared a mother with his second wife, which means that his third wife and his first wife were not related at all. They were each related to the second wife, The first one shared a father with the second wife, and the third one shared a mother with the second wife. But the first and the third had no relation whatsoever. Okay? And then what happened was Mesa. Now the third wife died. Mesa, the fourth wife died. And they all show up. There's 5 women. Who am I married to? So the halacha is, Mutter b'rishona, the kedushin was chal on the first wife. It was not chal on the second wife because it's the chosh isha, but the kedushin would be chal on the third wife because that's a total stranger to his first wife. The kedushin would not be chal on the fourth wife because that's a chosh isha with the third wife. But ubechamisha, who totally is stranger to the shlishas, kedushin is chal. So he finds himself married to 3 women. Now he's so well married to the 3 women, perfectly halachic marriages, that if he didn't have any children and he died, if Yevim was made on any one of these 3 wives, it would pater everybody. If Yevim or Chalita was made on any one of these 3 wives, they're all pater. However, this man may not have any relations with the second and fourth wife, because on them kedushin was never typhus, because he was married to their sister. And therefore, if he dies and someone makes yibum on the second and the fourth wife, which aren't his wife at all, then bias achas mehen poiter serasa. The imba ala shnia la'acha misas harishayna. And the Gemara is going to explain what this means. Is if it turns out, in fact, that the first wife did die, which means the marriage to the second wife was a legitimate marriage, so then it changes it from the odd numbers to the even numbers. Now it's mutter b'shnia, because when he married her, his first wife has already died. The third wife is not a good kedushin because he was married to the second wife at that time, and they were sisters. Uver revius, the fourth wife is a good marriage because there's no relation whatsoever between the second wife and the fourth wife, and therefore upoitre saying, if he died and Yevim or Chalita was made either to the shnia or to the revius, the other woman would be potter. And in this case, he's also on the third and the fifth wife. The first wife is not a problem because we say she died already. And since the third wife and the fifth wife are not married to him, of course, being boiled them if he dies has no impact. That's the first half of the Mishnah. Second half of the Mishnah gets into a Ben Teshka, who's not a Bardas, so his Yibum is not a good Yibum, Midaraisa, it's only Midarabanim. So Zok the Mishnah, Ben Teshka Shonim B'Yemecha, someone who's 9 years old on one day, so his Bia is a Bia, but he's not a Gadol to have Das. So the halacha is, who poisel al yidei achad. If he does Bia on the Yevamos, so you have a whole bunch of brothers, and one brother is 9 years and 1 day old, and he did Yibum, none of the other brothers could do Yibum anymore, because his Yibum is a good Yibum midrabanan. And if one of the brothers did Yibum, which is a bona fide real Yibum, of course he can't do Yibum anymore. However, if he made Yibum first, before anybody else, then all of his brothers cannot do Yibum anymore. But what if one of his brothers did Yibum already? So now this woman is 100% married to one of the brothers. If he goes and does Yibum afterwards, that's just nuth. That's nothing. And of course, his brother can stay married to the Yevamos. However, if he did Yibum first, and then one of his brothers came and did Yibum, then he won't be able to live with this woman anymore, because his brother's Yibum is a Yibum Daraisa. So therefore, he only prevents his brothers from doing Yibum if he had Bia with this woman before they did Bia. But the brothers who are Gedolim, whether or not they had Bia with this woman before his Bia or after his Bia, they would answer him from continuing to have Bia with this woman. Keita, let's use a practical example. A 9-year-old boy did Bia on his Yevamos. Pasal al yidei achad. None of the brothers are allowed to do Yibum anymore. What if some of the brothers did Bia, one of the brothers did Bia, or also b'maimer, or one of the brothers did Maimer, or Nosnu get, or one of the brothers gave a get, or Chaltzu, or one of the brothers did Chalitza, Poison al yodoi, he's no longer allowed to make a biyah. Frag the Gemara. We said in one case in the Mishnah, we said, what happens if Vimba al Ashniya la'achar misas harishon? If he had relations, if he married the second wife after the first wife died. Frag the Gemara. Auto kulu lav la'achar misas harishon. Aren't all the cases where after he found out that one wife died, only then did he proceed to marry the second wife? Yes, indeed. In all the cases, he only remarried after he heard that his earlier wife died. But now we're saying is la'achar misas rishon nevada. The second case in the Mishnah is when not only did he hear that his first wife died, she actually did die. And if she actually did die, then his marriage to the second wife was a good marriage and it's chal. Okay, we will stop over here because this is where we ended today in shul. So we'll all be at the same place and we'll continue in Mishnah tomorrow. Shkoyach, everybody, have a gittavach. Gittavach. Rebel, you're muted, so I can't hear you.